Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Growing up, I always knew my parents were a little different than most. They had an air of entitlement about them, and were quick to make demands of others without offering anything in return. As a kid, I didn't think much of it. I figured all parents were like that to some degree. But as I got older, their behavior only got worse. Everything came to a head last year when I finally finished paying off my house. At 32, I was proud to officially own my very first home all on my own. It was a modest place, but it was mine. To celebrate, I invited my parents over for dinner. As soon as they walked in the door, the criticisms started pouring out. "Why did you buy such a small house?" My mother scoffed, not even bothering to compliment me. My father shook his head in disapproval. "With the money you make, you should have gotten something much nicer." I tried to shrug off their rude comments. This was supposed to be a joyous occasion, and I wasn't going to let them ruin it. During dinner, the conversation turned to my job. I had recently received a promotion and pay raise. When I shared the news, my parents' eyes lit up in a way I can only describe as greedy. "Wow, you must be rolling in money now," my dad said. "When are you going to share the wealth with your poor parents?" I chuckled nervously, assuming he was joking, but the serious expression on his face told me otherwise. "What do you mean, share the wealth?" I asked. "We deserve some of that money," my mother chimed in. "After all, we raised you and got you to where you are today." I stared at them, dumbfounded. Where was this coming from? "I'm sorry, but I work hard for my money," I replied. "I can't just hand it out to people, even if they are my parents." My dad's face turned red with anger. He slammed his fist on the table. "How dare you deny your own parents?" he shouted. "You ungrateful child! You'd have nothing if it wasn't for us." "That's right," my mother yelled. "You owe us everything. We demand you hand over half your paycheck to us from now on, and you're going to transfer ownership of this house to our names too." I was completely shocked. They had lost their minds. "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "This is my house that I worked hard to buy, and my money is mine alone to spend how I choose." My dad stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over. He stormed over and grabbed me by my shirt collar. "You will do as we say," he screamed in my face, "or so help me, you'll regret the day you were born." He reared his fist back, ready to punch me. I quickly twisted out of his grip and shoved him back. My mother let out a shriek and came at me, clawing my face and arms. I managed to push them both away and make a run for the front door. "If you ever come near me again, I'm calling the police," I yelled. Then I slammed the door shut. My hands shook as the adrenaline coursed through my veins. I paced around the living room, trying to process what had just happened. My own parents had violently attacked me for refusing to hand over my earnings and property to them. It was unbelievable. After I managed to calm down, I decided I needed to report their assault to the authorities. The next day, I went to the police station and filed a report, describing the incident in detail. Unfortunately, with no physical evidence or witnesses, it was my word against theirs. The police said there was little they could do without proof of wrongdoing. Over the next few weeks, I cautiously went about my life, constantly looking over my shoulder. My parents made no attempts to contact me. I hoped they had finally realized their behavior was unacceptable. But of course, I wasn't that lucky. One afternoon, I was served with a court summons. My parents were suing me for not providing adequate financial support as their child. I was livid. Not only had they attacked me, but now they were trying to drag me through court to get my money. I immediately got in touch with a lawyer friend from work. He agreed to represent me pro bono. With his help, I was well prepared when our court date arrived. As we stood before the judge, my parents spun some tale about how neglectful and selfish I had been. They said they were living in poverty while I flaunted my wealth and refused to lend them even a small amount of assistance. When it was my turn, I told the real story. I explained their excessive demands and how they reacted violently when I refused them. I also provided financial records showing they were receiving Social Security checks that provided a stable income. The judge listened carefully, his eyes narrowing at my parents' bold-faced lies. He denied their frivolous lawsuit and sternly warned them against harassing me further. They shot me malevolent glares, but said nothing as they stormed out of the courtroom in defeat. I was immensely relieved to have this ugly ordeal over with. The judge granted me a restraining order against my parents, so hopefully I won't have to deal with them again anytime soon. I'm saddened that our relationship has deteriorated to this point, but their greed and entitlement gave me no choice. I can hold my head high knowing I stood up for myself against their ludicrous demands. Justice was served in the end. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I have a friend named Carrie who just broke a story to me. Not sure if it's petty or pro-revenge or even malicious compliance, but here it is. Done on the phone, and autocorrect hates me. The cast. Names have been changed to protect identities. Carrie. My friend and the heroine of the story. Sharon. The secretary with loose morals. Roger. It manager and villain of the story. Ivan. The CEO and company owner, also owner of 3 or so other small companies, one of which was in the same office block. Olivia, Roger's wife. Carrie works for a small IT company as a programmer and web designer, along with about 8 others, including her manager and her newest colleague, Sharon, the secretary. Roger is a womanizing rogue who makes frequent moderately offensive comments about women, customers, and staff, like he has no brain-mouth filter. Sharon is, as Carrie puts it, an upwardly mobile skank who will literally, yes, actually blow the boss if he buys her new shoes, so boner for a bonus. And she has had a bonus, just not for productivity. The first Carrie knew about Sharon's behavior was late one Saturday afternoon when everyone had left for the weekend, except Carrie as she had a project. She was beavering away at her desk in a nearly silent office when she heard a squeal. She immediately got up to investigate and found her boss's door ajar. She heard another squeal and walked in. Finding Sharon bent over the desk with her skirt hitched up above her hips, her boss, trousers round his ankles, balls deep behind her. Yes, this is artistic license, but that's how she described it. Roger's expression indicated fury and embarrassment, and he sounded to be mid-nut. Sharon had an expression like the cat that had the cream, with no pun intended. She certainly didn't seem bothered about being caught. Roger recovered his composure, put his trousers back on, and called Carrie back into the room. She hadn't stopped to watch, and threatened to fire her if she let slip what she'd seen. The instruction was, tell nobody, act like it never happened. It's important at this point to mention that this was at the height of COVID, and they were looking at the possibility of reducing staff numbers, something which fortunately never happened, but at the time of this story nobody was sure. Carrie kept quiet. Ooh, that's nice alliteration. Roger would occasionally remember that she knew what he was up to and would give her dirty looks, but little more was said. Sharon and Roger were still having regular sex at work, and Sharon was getting the bonuses that the team should have received. She was also receiving boners, but nobody would have felt jealous had they known. One Saturday, about 6 months after the initial shock discovery, an opportunity for revenge, and technically malicious compliance, presented itself. Olivia, Roger's wife, popped in. The staff were still there, and the office was busy and a bit noisy. Roger had excused himself to his office with Sharon early, as he knew his wife would be in later to meet him, and wanted to get his end away before she arrived. She was early. Olivia was standing at Sharon's desk. Sharon was the secretary, after all. And Carrie saw an opportunity. She offered to help in the absence of the secretary, and Olivia asked to see Roger. Carrie obliged. The next bit is a little vague, as Carrie skips some details. But apparently, she knows how to get past the lock on his office door. Like the door frame is a little too big, and that's the vague bit. Carrie was able to open the door as if it wasn't locked and hold it open for Olivia, who walked in to see her husband screwing the secretary from behind. Olivia's eruption was one of incandescent fury, which caused Roger's excuses to melt away. He was trying to explain that it wasn't what it looked like while pulling his trousers up. Sharon, meanwhile, had tried to discreetly leave, but Olivia had turned her full wrath on Sharon's direction. So Sharon excused herself by asking Roger why he'd never told her he was married. He had actually told her, but the ruse worked. Roger stared daggers at Carrie, but she told him that she'd done as he asked. She had never told anyone, and had acted as if it had never happened, just as he'd demanded. Olivia asked what she meant, and she explained in painful detail what had been going on. With Olivia screaming blue murder at Roger, nobody heard the big boss, Ivan, arrive. He must have heard the ruckus and come to investigate. At this point, he'd heard enough from outside the office, and Carrie was asked to leave. Roger doesn't work there anymore, and neither does Sharon. Sharon was dismissed for gross misconduct, and Roger is awaiting a court date. Something about fraud or embezzlement or something. Details are sketchy here. No information about his marriage. Sorry. Carrie is still at the company, but now works as an assistant manager to a newly appointed female manager. The next one is a petty revenge story. So, I'm 38F, vacationing with my mother, 71F, in Europe right now. And she just told me this epic story that I must now pass down to all of you. Some background. My mother is a very nice person to strangers, especially salespeople. Aggressive salespeople will back her into a corner for an hour until I come to rescue her because she doesn't want to be rude. My father passed away a few years ago at age 81, and he was born in Egypt and was schooled in both French and Arabic, considering both to be his native languages. He then learned English as an adult when he moved to the US. A few years after they got married in 1976, but before they had kids, they took a vacation to Paris. My mother collects stamps, and she wanted some French plate blocks to add to her collection. She left my father napping in the hotel room and went to the post office a block away, planning on spending $400 on stamps. She got to the post office and waited in a very long line. When she finally got to the front, the woman behind the counter told her in perfect English that she didn't speak English, so my mom waited for another post employee to become free. The second employee finally became available, but was very rude to my mother, telling her that she couldn't help her, couldn't sell her this, out of stock of that, etc., while rolling her eyes and being otherwise nasty and rude, nearly bringing my mother to tears. My mother was so upset that she decided to get some revenge. She went back to the hotel room and woke up my father, bringing him to the post office. My mother waited until the rude woman was available and had my dad translate in perfect French, telling the woman that my mom wanted the plate block of every set of stamps she had, watching her remove the plate block from each sheet. For those of you who don't know, when you remove the plate block from a sheet of stamps, the remaining stamps must be counted by hand. After the nasty woman had a nice stack of plate blocks for my mother, one of every stamp design they had, my mother turned to my father and said, "Tell her I've changed my mind." Not only did that woman miss out on a huge sale for being mean and nasty, but she also had to spend a good 60 minutes after closing to hand count each individual stamp after they closed for the day. I am just so proud of my very polite mother right now. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This might be long, but worth the read, I think. Spec home build with a $12M budget and a 16-month schedule. Next door neighbor immediately qualifies as a complete D-head, knows everybody, including the principals of the company I work for. At the very beginning of the work, he asks for a row of redwood trees to be planted as screening between the properties. Principals grant his request as a good neighbor gesture, $31K. Every step of the project, he either stands out at the end of the drive taking pictures, or he's flying his drone over the lot. He starts asking questions about whether or not work in progress is covered under the permit. He confides that he has obtained a copy of the permit and a set of plans. One day, he asks us for a meeting to discuss the redwood trees. Yes, those trees. He comes over at the appointed time and introduces his wife's landscape architect. Famous guy, apparently, and he tries pulling some muscle moves by trying to convince us that the redwood trees are stealing their water. They also don't fit his vision for the project they are considering, which will be a total side and backyard makeover with walkways, stone walls, fountains, etc. He wants mature oak trees instead. Cut down and remove the redwoods at our expense and plant new oak trees also at our expense because, screening. We decline, which sends famous architect guy and the wife into a rage. They decide to move forward with their project anyway, and the major earth moving, concrete forming, irrigation, etc. are all getting placed. Mr. Drone Guy continues to make efforts to get the oak trees swapped in under threats that maybe some of the work we're doing isn't covered under the permit. Seems he also acted as the GC for his own remodel, so he must really know what he's talking about. He sends emails, registered letters from his lawyer, all in an effort to get us to swap out the trees. Finally, we are within sight of completing our project, and from the second floor, we can see that they have really transformed their whole yard into little parklets with mature plantings and walkways and all the other stuff. It's impressive. So I call the town for a courtesy inspection prior to final, and the next day the inspector, an old friend whose father is also an old friend, stops by to tour the property for any red flags. I save the best for last, and we make it upstairs and make it to the best possible viewing point of the neighbor's magnificent landscape project, and my inspector friend casually but loudly says, "What the hell is all that? I never saw a permit come through for all that." And he bounds downstairs and heads back to the office, I'm guessing to pull files. Here comes the best part. Through abutting property searches that we always perform as due diligence, we discovered that the neighbor's side yard, in its entirety, is an 80-foot wide utility easement for the single largest underground water aqueduct for the entire region. Can't be built on. We kept mum. Now, because there is also a seasonal creek that crosses said easement, Fish and game are notified of the work in progress. In addition, we now have the State Water Resources Board, along with the major water utility company inspections and enforcement department, making inquiries along with the town building department. No permit application was ever submitted for any of the work Mr. Drone Guy had done. Oof. Our property sold, and during some modifications for the new owner, we watched with subdued glee as every stick and stone was removed from the offending area, and was to be left in a natural state for eternity. Major fines were also levied. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened a while ago. I learned long ago how to study effectively for myself for tests. I was in college and needed to study for an upcoming test, so I was in the local library at a single table. I had everything spread out and color-coded with colored pens, pencils, markers, and highlighters. I was absorbed by what I was doing when a sweet, cute, and adorable little girl came to me to ask politely if she could use some paper and colored pencils. I told her no. She smiled and nodded and went back to her mom. I was about to go back to studying when her mom appeared by my side and looked angry as hell. She told me to either let her daughter use my things or put them away. Her daughter looked miserable and embarrassed. I felt really sorry for her. I just stared at her in complete surprise at the sheer entitlement. I'd heard stories of similar people, but had thought that it was exaggerated. I told her to leave me alone and go away. She told me I was being disrespectful to my elder. With a hard roll of my eyes, I told her, "I am at least a few years older than you." She started screaming, which brought the librarian over. Y'all, I have never seen this woman be tough. I thought she was a pushover. She was so sweet and treated everyone like they were her babies. She was like the grandma everyone wanted. She went from sweet grandma to raging badass. Hell, she scared me worse than the time I got mock charged by a mama bear. She yelled at her, "What did I tell you about coming here again? Your daughter is welcome to come here." "You are not. You have been banned from here for harassing everyone here. Get out now." I'm pretty sure my eyes were popping out of my face. I was definitely slack-jawed. The entitled mom was backing up pretty fast. Then, from raging badass in a split second back to sweet elderly grandma, she gave the little girl a hug and a kiss on her forehead. She came over to me to see if I was okay and grinned at my shocked face. "I always let people think that I'm too sweet to be tough. The surprise is effective." I nodded and started packing up my things, and told her that I would never be able to refocus on my studies for that day. The next one is an entitled parent story, so this happened last night. I'm in a very complicated place with my ex-husband and our kids. My oldest has ASD, autism spectrum disorder, pathological demand avoidance, and is very violent. So for the safety of our younger two, CPS made me give custody to my ex-husband. Now that summer is here, my ex decided to override the plan for my son to come down for 2 weeks, and instead sent him down for 2 months. Ex and my son live on the East Coast while I'm on the West. So my son is staying with his Opie and Oma until the 2 weeks that I can have him at my house. We live close to Omi and Opie, my ex-in-laws, and my ex-BIL lives there too. Last night at 7:20, I got a call from my son. He was very upset, and I hear his Omi and uncle screaming in the background. Omi is an old lady racist, and uncle reminds me of the trenchcoat guys who shot up that school in the USA. Thank God I'm in Canada, and he can't have access to guns. I can barely make out what's going on. I understand can I come over, mad at me, social media, and Asian. So I tell him yes, as he was getting very upset and overwhelmed, and I was hoping to stop him from exploding and getting violent, as his Oma has myotonic muscular dystrophy. Well, he gets here and gives me a big hug and has a meltdown. The story comes out that his uncle came home, and Oma and uncle started debating/arguing about things, got racist, then told my son that Asian is a place, not an ethnicity. And he was very overwhelmed, and the fighting is stressing him out. He said Opie was out, and was going to wait for him to come home as he calms things down. A few hours go by, I'm on my VR, virtual reality, and hear him call his Oma asking for Opie to call when he gets in, then yelling. I get off, and he explains that his Oma told him no, that she won't get Opie to call him. So I calm down, wait about 20 minutes, and call Oma Opie myself. Opie is in the shower, and I ask Oma to get Opie to call me back. She says she can't guarantee she will tell him. I tell her that kiddo has camp this morning, and tell her again he needs to call me back. She gets pissed with me. I get a call from Opie and explain what happened, that my son can stay here, but he needs to talk to his wife, as telling my 15-year-old son that she won't pass a message on to call him is not okay. He is astonished and confused and said he called me back. I told him that my son called and his wife refused to pass on the message. He got shocked and said, "No, that can't be." Then I hear Omi in the background saying, "Oh yeah, grandson called for you." Now I have barely slept as I have been on the couch all night making sure all kids are safe. Any tips on dealing with racist grandparents? Oma and Uncle really go to town on a few races and immigrants, which is truly funny as they are immigrants themselves. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.